Hey everyone, I'm Richard. In video 3 we successfully created a skin tone panel using a global script and custom buttons to dynamically change the character's skin tone. Now in video 4, we're building selection panels for armors and weapons. This will allow players to cycle through different equipment options using left and right navigation buttons while the game is running. First, we need to create reusable selection panel components that we can use for both armors and weapons. Inside our interface folder, let's create a new folder called selection panel. Then right-click on this folder and create a new scene. We'll call it selection panel and we'll use panel container as the base node. Now let's configure this panel. On the right side, set the custom minimum size X to 330 to match our other panels. Scroll down to theme overrides, then styles, and right-click to load our panel style that we created in video 2. This will give it that consistent dark gray background, border, and inner spacing. Inside selection panel, create an HBox container, so that the nodes inside are displayed next to each other horizontally. Now create a button inside the HBox container and name it left button. Set its text to a less than symbol, give it a custom minimum size of 50 by 50, and set its font size to 30. Next, create a label inside HBox container with the text label for now. We'll fix this later when we add the script. Duplicate the left button, rename it right button, and make sure to move it below the label so it's on the right side of it, and change its text to a greater than symbol. Let's configure the label. Click on it, go to container sizing inside layout, and enable horizontal expand so it takes up all the available space between the buttons. Change the font size to 25, and set the horizontal align to center. Save and let's open the main scene. Right-click on the left container and select Instantiate Child Scene. Choose our selection panel and name this instance Armor Panel. Now duplicate it and call the duplicate Weapon Panel. Let's test this quickly. As you can see, the label still says label, so let's fix that. Open the selection panel scene, and on the right panel, let's create a new script. We'll call it selectionpanel.gd and save it in the scenes folder. Define the class name as selection panel, extending panel container. Then we'll create a custom signal called changed, which when emitted, should send the option string that was selected. We need some exported variables that we can configure from the inspector. Let's add label text as a string, which will allow us to set the panel's label from the inspector, and options as an array of strings, which will hold all the available options for this panel, like our armor or weapon names. Now let's get references to our UI elements. We'll use onReady for the label, left button, and right button. We can just drag them into the code in order to get their corresponding path within the scene. We'll also need a variable to track the current selection. Let's call it current option as a string. In the ready function, we'll set the label text to our label text variable and connect the button presses to our selection functions. The left button we'll call select previous, and the right button we'll call select next. Now for the selection logic, in select previous we'll find the current options index in our options array. Calculate the previous index by subtracting 1, and if it goes below 0, we'll wrap around to the last item in the array, creating a circular navigation. Then we'll update current option and emit the change signal. Let's copy this function. Rename it select next and add a few adjustments. Here we want to find the current index and add 1 for the next index. And if it exceeds the array size, we'll wrap around to 0. And just like we select previous, update the current option and emit the signal. Now, let's go back to the main scene and configure our panels. Click on Armor panel, and in the inspector set the label text to Armor. For the options, let's check what we have available. In the Assets folder, under Sprite Sheets, Player, Armor, we can see our armor options. So in the options array, let's add Cloth, Leather Armor, and Armor. Now click on Weapon panel. Set the label text to Weapon, and for options, let's check the Weapons folder. We'll add Stick, Sword, and Golden Sword to the options array. Let's test this. Now we can see our selection panels are correctly updating the labels to Armor and to Weapon, but the buttons, while clickable, they do nothing yet. Let's close the debug window so we can implement the core functionality. Open the player script. We need to create functions to swap armors and weapons. Let's add swap armor that takes an armor string and calls the helper function swap texture with armor, armor sprite, and armor name. Similarly, add swap weapon that calls swap texture with weapon, the weapon sprite, and the weapon name. Now let's scroll down to add our helper functions. I'll paste in the swap texture function along with the build texture path and sync animation helper functions. You can either pause here and copy the code from the screen, or I'll leave a link in the description below for you to copy paste it easily. The swap texture function is the core of our texture swapping system. Let me walk through it line by line with an example. Let's say we're changing the character's weapon. The parameters we should receive are a weapon string for the player part, weapon sprite for the sprite, and the option string we are changing to, like sword. The first thing we do is save the current frame index and animation name of the animated sprite. We need this so we can restore the characters to the exact same state after swapping textures. Then we get a reference to the SpriteFrames resource, which is the container that holds all the animations and their individual frames. Next, it loops through all the animation names in the SpriteFrames, which are the 4 directions for idle and the 4 directions for run. We need to swap textures for each frame of each animation. So we get the frame count of the current animation we're iterating through. And for each frame index, we get the path to the texture we want to switch to through the build texture path helper function. Then we load the new texture and update the frame's atlas property. This is the actual swap, replacing the old texture while keeping the same frame structure. Once we are done with all frames and animations, we call sync animation to set all sprites to the same frame and animation they were on before. This ensures all body parts stay synchronized after the texture swap. Let's now take a look at build texture path. This function needs to construct and return the correct path to the texture file based on the player part, texture name, and animation name. So if we follow the same example as before, this function would receive the player part weapon, the texture name sword, and the animation name that's being iterated through in the swap texture function in that moment. For example, rundown. The first thing it does is building the base folder path, which points to our player folder inside asset structure, and then it adds the player part folder, in this case weapon, giving us the path to where all the weapon textures are kept. Next, it checks if the animation name contains run to determine which type of sprite sheet we need. Since our animation is rundown, it contains run, so we know we need the run version of the sprite sheet. Then we return the whole sprite sheet path by putting all the strings together into one, which as you can see is the actual path to the texture file for the weapon and animation. Lastly, sync animation ensures all our sprites stay in sync when we swap textures, maintaining the same frame and animation across all body parts. Let's move on and connect everything in the main script. Open the main scene and then the script. We need to get references to our armor and weapon panels. Add on ready variables for both panels the same way we've been doing so far. In the ready function, let's connect the change signal from both panels to their respective handler functions. Now create an armor changed that takes an armor string and calls player swap armor function with it. Then we do the same for our weapon changed, calling player swap weapon. Now let's test everything. Hit play. Now when you click the buttons of the weapon panel, you should see the character's weapon change in real time. Same with the armor. We've successfully created a fully functional selection system that dynamically loads and changes sprite textures at runtime. In video 5, we'll add a randomize button that will instantly generate random character combinations, making the character creation process even more fun and interactive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.